You can feel free to raise your hand or use the raise hand feature on Zoom. But honestly, I don't even need you to raise your hand because I know that if you're in tech, you've been blocked. It happens to everyone. I was blocked last week. My team's documentation said, click here for an example, and it went to a 404. So I just Googled around. I tried to find other docs. I tried to figure out what was going on, and I just couldn't get anywhere. And we've all been there. We know what it feels like. And at some point, you just have to ask a human being what's going on. And this can sometimes be really intimidating and can be really hard. But I'm going to talk about some strategies inspired by journalism for asking better questions. So, yeah, a little bit about me. I am a full stack software engineer at Attentive. I work in Java, React, and Python. I will always stop the car for any petting zoo or baby animal, anything. I love these goats. I've got my QR code here if you'd like to connect. I always say people, include a note saying we met at Elevate, so I know you're not a bot, but I also know that LinkedIn doesn't let everyone send notes, so I'll try to use judgment. And as Angie said, I've been a software engineer for just over 3 years. This is my second career. My first career was in journalism. I asked lots of questions in my former career. I like to think that I got pretty good at asking the right question of the right person at the right time to get the information that I need. Today, I still ask lots of questions. Some days, the right person is me, and the right time is every 5 minutes. But I do also ask technical questions of other people quite frequently, and I'm going to be giving 4 tips today about how to ask those questions to get you unblocked faster. But why is asking technical questions so hard? Now, I don't know if these are the 4 most common reasons that people don't like asking questions, but in my informal survey of my colleagues, these come up a lot. So we'll go through them briefly and then talk about some solutions pulled straight from the journalism toolbox to counter these fears. So people will think I'm stupid. Yeah, they might actually, but that's not the right framing, and I'll tell you why. I don't want to be a bother. I was annoying that team. Are you being respectful? It's really okay, I promise. Um, Last time I asked that team or that person, I didn't get an answer. Well, maybe you need to figure out a different way to phrase your question or a different person to ask. It's just faster to figure it out on my own. Well, is it though? Because you're blocked, you've already tried everything. And also, I will argue that even if you can figure something out on your own, you might not want to, and we'll get to why. So we'll talk in detail about the first issue. I don't want to ask a question because I should know this answer. People will think I'm stupid for asking this question. Now, if you've ever asked the question on the internet, you've probably worried about or even experienced something like this. That's because people who answer questions from strangers on the internet can be horrible. Asking online, I've heard, is called hard mode. Um, One of the most popular canonical guides to asking questions on web forums is, first of all, old enough that they use the term web forums. And second of all, starts with calling people who ask bad questions losers. And it does not get better from there. And despite the fact that this guide is actually old enough to buy cigarettes, it is still widely cited across the internet. It's a culture that still persists. And I don't like that. It's pretty gross. And of course, if you happen to have a female coded presence online, things get even riskier. Now, it doesn't stop being risky when you're asking questions of people you know. Some of you might be here because you want to ask better questions of your colleagues, your classmates if you're in school, and some of you may be surrounded by jerks. I hear often, especially from people who are maybe one of the only women on their team, that they feel like they're representing all of womankind, and so they have to be always 100% on top of their A game. I'll admit I have been lucky enough to mostly not experience this feeling. I've been on some great teams with wonderful gender diversity. My male colleagues are great allies, but this is not the case everywhere, and we know this. So asking questions, which is an inherently vulnerable thing, does come with risks. Excuse me. But I would argue that that is the wrong framing. To explain why, let me talk about black holes for a minute. As a journalist, I worked in breaking science news. I don't have that strong of a background in science, but the breadth of stuff I was expected to be able to cover was really intense. You'd get a call or an email on a Monday morning and say, can you write a story about this new black hole research? And can you do it by Wednesday? And then you have 48 hours to learn enough about black holes to understand the bare minimum to call an expert who probably has a PhD in black holeology. Okay, astronomy, fine. But you have to ask her enough questions to help you understand the significance of the new research. Now, I will never be the expert in that situation. They say there are no stupid questions, and I think that's true, but these will be the closest you get to a stupid question. I will never impress Dr. Black Hole with an incisive question because she has been studying black holes her entire life, and I just started reading the Wikipedia page about them yesterday. So I just have to put my ego away and not worry about being smart and ask the question. And then you get up and you do it again the next week, but it's about the monkeys of Papua New Guinea. And you do it because that's the job. The job is never to be the smartest person in the room, it's to find things out. The job description is essentially not knowing things, asking people questions until you understand those things, and then explaining them to other people. Now, if anyone struggles with asking technical questions, I suggest working as a journalist for 6 months. And if that's not feasible, it's okay because the lessons are transferable. Now, if you're a software engineer, the breadth of things you're expected to know is also massive. This is the roadmap.sh list of recommended topics for front end development. I didn't even have room to put backend in here. I don't think it is actually physically possible to be an expert in all of these things. If you are, my company is hiring and we really want to talk to you. But the truth is, the job isn't being an expert at everything, it's being aware of what you don't know and knowing how to figure it out. Now, another way of thinking about this is the term growth mindset, which, if you've been in the sessions today, I think you've heard this a lot. I heard it in the keynote, I heard it at the jobs panel. I love the term growth mindset. It's the idea of putting yourself in the mindset of not thinking you're born with certain skills and that's all you get, but that you can get better at anything with practice. But guess what? I never heard the term growth mindset until I entered software engineering. Journalists don't talk about growth mindset, not because they don't care about it, but because they kind of all have it figured out already, because they've gone through this work of constantly being the person in the room who knows the least and whose job it is to find out. I feel like the term growth mindset is talked about more in software because it's something that so many people struggle with. So that's my first tip. Anyone who judges you for asking a question and doesn't understand that the job is about constantly not knowing things knows a lot less than they think they do, and it reflects more on them. So now we'll talk about some other tips, some more nuts and bolts tips about asking questions. Now, if you have any experience in journalism, or you just watch Spotlight, you know that journalists love the 5 Ws: who, what, where, when, and why. So the next tip is about who to ask, and it relates to 2 of these bullet points here. It really pays to invest effort into finding out who is the best person to ask your question. And I don't just mean, oh, these 5 people are on the team that maintains this service, so I'll ask in their team Slack channel. I mean, this individual person wrote 60% of the code for this service. Maybe they're not even on that team anymore. They changed jobs, but their name is still all over the Git blame. Or maybe my company has a team dedicated to Datadog questions, but I also happen to know that my coworker used to intern there. So if I need a fast answer, I might ask him first. I like to think of this as building my source list or my Rolodex for people who are of a certain age. Experts are everywhere, and they might not be the ones in the obvious places. Now, this applies whether you work in the industry, in which case your experts are your coworkers, or not, in which case we're talking classmates, professors, people you meet at meetups, the Discord community, or even a conference like this one. I promise if we talk today or tomorrow, I'll remember what you're an expert in, and someday you might see me hitting you up. Now, I want to be clear. Your company might have policies around if you have a question about such and such thing, you have to ask in this why public channel because then the on-call can handle it. And I'm not suggesting going around that policy right away. There is logic to allowing teams to triage questions effectively, and there's logic to wanting questions to be asked in public, because then they can be answered in public and everyone benefits from the answers. This is a good thing. But you don't want your question to fall victim to the bystander effect. That's the idea that people might be less likely to help you when there's others around. Maybe someone sees that you posted a question, but they don't really have time to handle it, and someone else in the Slack could, but the on-call is actually in 3 incidents. The subject matter expert is on vacation, but she forgot to update her calendar. The team lead is in a meeting. So only you have the context to know whether, if in this situation, a polite DM to a friendly teammate would be politically savvy, but I found that it often works wonders. Now, this isn't treating people like resources, which is something you hear a lot with networking or that kind of thing, but it's about doing what journalists do. It's about building relationships with smart people so that you can tap into their expertise when you need it. And also, let's say you did ask an individual person a question and they answered you. You kind of, they did you a favor. You broke the rules, you went outside the chain of command, or they just did something nice for you. Was that bad? No, but you do have to close the loop. So in the journalism world, that would mean publish. Um, in this case, just make sure that you share what you learned, you gave back. Update an internal documentation page, do a knowledge share with your team, write a blog post for your blog if that's appropriate, and make sure that the person who helps you in private knows that you went on to help other people in public. It can be as simple as, thank you so much for talking me through this new architecture pattern. I'll make sure I take it back to the team. It doesn't have to be a huge lift, but it means that that person will be so much more likely to help you in the future because you've shown that their knowledge has given you a multiplier effect. And so they have also had a multiplier effect. Now, let's say you asked someone in private and they didn't answer you, or for whatever reason, you don't have your individual person to ask. And so you're just you feel like you're shouting your questions into a void. You're posting on Stack Exchange, or you're posting on Slack, or whatever, and no one's answering your questions. Maybe you need to phrase your question a different way. So, journalists are taught to get the name of the dog. That means that even small details that might seem insignificant can make for a better story. For us coders, including as many details as you can in your question makes your question easier to answer. The more easy it is to answer, the more likely you are to get an answer. Now, I know this is probably pretty intuitive for people. I think many of us who have been in the industry for a while know this, but we still fall victim to this trap, don't we? It isn't working. It's just really easy to ask. It's not easy to answer because there's all these follow-up questions. What isn't working? Is it a runtime error? No error at all? Service won't start up? What environment is this happening in? Dev, prod, local. Um, Also, as you've probably experienced, if you take the time to type out your question with all these details, you're kind of rubber ducking with yourself. By the time you get to the end, you might have answered your own question. Now, there is one exception in which it isn't working, works really well. When I have trouble even formulating my question, when I don't even know the terms to ask, I will Google it's not working. Because there's at least one other person out there who's had the same problem. This almost never gets the answer, but it does get me closer to the question. In general, however, details are good. On the other hand, a wall of text is also not good. This is the longest question on the Stack Exchange site, so it actually has quite a few answers, I think because it is famous as being the longest question on the Stack Exchange site. But that whole thing on the right is the question. There's no answers in that screenshot. It just keeps going. If it did not have the notoriety of being the longest question, I don't think anyone would answer it. Journalists use the concept of an inverted pyramid when they're writing news stories. It's essentially a fancy way of saying that the most important thing goes at the top and the least important thing goes at the bottom. Just remember that both newsreaders and your coworkers, or whoever's answering your question, could stop reading at any time. So when you're posing a technical question, you might want to consider a similar format, with the most important aspect of your question first, then follow up with additional information, then finish with nice to have context. Then see what happens when you lose the last two sentences. Does it change the meaning? If not, keep them gone. When all else fails, you can trick people by using threads. Beware the XY question. There's actually no journalism tie-in here. This is a concept invented by engineering, but it's such a good tip, so I do include it. An XY question is one where you ask how to do X, but you actually want to accomplish Y. So the quintessential XY question, if you Google it, is someone asking how to get the last three characters of a file name, when what they actually want is the file's extension, which is not necessarily always three characters. Or as you can see by this contrived example, providing the why is often helpful because it turns out you might be asking a different question than you think you are. Now, if you're asking an XY question, you probably don't realize that you're doing it, but you can still try these steps. Make sure you're not starting from an assumption, or if you are, you're spelling out what assumptions you made. Provide more details if asked, and share what you've already ruled out and why. If you're on the receiving end of what you think is an XY question, feel free to ask, why do you want to do this? And then again, and possibly even again if necessary. Other open questions like what is the context of this ask are also very helpful. And finally, sometimes it's not an XY question as much as you think it is. Sometimes they actually do just want to get the last three characters of the file name. So now we're at the end. You might think, this is a lot of work. It's just faster to figure this out on my own. I'm really good at Google. I've got ChatGPT. I've got this textbook. I can do it. Well, I'm going to say it's not, because first of all, if you're blocked, you've probably already tried these things. But even if you're not, there's one more benefit to asking another person. One that's a little less obvious. We talked about the who, what, and where of asking questions. I kind of skipped the when, but we didn't talk about the why. Why does this matter? It matters because, as I said before, software engineering is a discipline of continually learning new things. And even the smartest senior engineers don't know everything on their own. I really believe that learning is better in community. Even again, if you're a solo dev and you're really good at learning from ChatGPT and Google and all that, learning is still better in community. What I said in the beginning is that asking questions is a vulnerable act. Making yourself vulnerable is not fun, but it brings you closer to the people that you're vulnerable with. It builds community when we learn together and we admit that we don't know things. And I think in these times, more than ever, we need to have community. We need to be closer to people. None of us are better alone than we are together. So I don't think that we can fix everything wrong with the world by asking someone, hey, what's up with this library? But can we build our own community by being vulnerable together and admitting what we don't know? I'm totally willing to find out. Thank you so much. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. And that's all I got. Angie, is that the end?
Yep. So
Okay. I
that
can stick around for 2 minutes, or you can give everyone their 2 minutes back.
we can see if there's any questions. And if there's no questions, I can ask you a question.
Go for it.
Um, let's see. Mm, The question I've always been asking people is what's a small mindset shift that's made a big difference in your career?
Ooh, you know, I'm going to say this is a mindset shift that was put upon me when I joined my current company. I joined a team that was all juniors. It was sort of like the feeder team. And so everyone on the team um, had struggles with some of these imposter syndrome things and some of this growth mindset stuff that I talked about. And they had started a private channel called Stupid Questions. And they would ask their stupid questions in that channel without judgment. And then someone said, you know what, this is still labeling something, and we don't like the way that it's labeled. So they changed the name of the channel before I started to Cool Questions. And so now when you have a cool question, you post in the Cool Questions channel. And I just thought that was so smart. And that is the attitude that I try to take with me. There are no stupid questions. There are cool questions, and you're very cool for asking them. But I love that so much. And I'm not even sure which of my colleagues had that idea, but I thank them every day.
That is a great piece of advice on just changing the messaging.
Yep, exactly.
You're asked to see the slide about rephrasing the question, but also if you want to share your slides on LinkedIn
Yeah,
or something, that might be a good way to get them out there for everyone else.
yeah, this is also recorded, right?
Yes, we'll
Okay,
eventually put this on YouTube.
okay. It'll be on YouTube and I'll figure out a way to post the slides, but thank you.
Mel asked, "What's your exact path in inspo pivoting to tech?"
Um, it's a little dark, but I was a journalist until the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and I was working at a small nonprofit, and I was convinced that I was going to become laid off, and I was not laid off, and then I became so depressed that I wished I had been laid off, and so then I realized that something needed to change, and I just always been interested in web development, and luckily was able to make that transition.
Mary asked, if you don't mind taking one more question, what do you think of the elevation of expertise and status instead of celebrating inquiry?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that I don't agree. Yeah, I think that that does happen in tech. It does happen in journalism as well, of course. It's absolutely true. But I think that, as you've heard from other speakers before, curiosity, asking questions, admitting that no one knows everything is a much better attitude. And I do think that we elevate experts too much. And sorry, not. I believe that we elevate people who act like experts, and they don't actually know the most. And that's how we're maybe in some of the national situation that we find ourselves in here in the US.
It's a good way of putting it. Okay, thank you, Rachel, for joining us.